For those of you that stuck around, you're wise. This is going to be light and entertaining. I'm not going to drill too deep, even though I'm talking about safety. I guess, CAC, you asked me to talk about people working alone. I actually talked to a bunch of people in the industry, and there's not a whole lot to share, but what I was able to glean, we'll talk about. But first, we'll talk a little bit about the safety. I'll talk a little bit about economic history. I suspect a lot of people have heard of Staggers, but don't know what it is or why it was, and so forth. Look at traffic levels and so on, and then we'll get into the working alone. So here are the quick themes of safety. Every year we're the safest in something, except I don't think we were the safest in anything this past year. I mean, numbers were good, but I don't think we can brag it was the safest year for blank, unless it's some minor metric we don't care about. Train accidents, this is certainly the broadest metric. It includes anything that caused more than $10,700 of damage, which is frankly a fender bender in the industry. And, pretty favorable. If we went back to 1980, it would be very dramatic. 1980 would be up on the ceiling. My boss told me to quit going back to 1980. We can't keep bragging about that. That's a generation, 2 generations ago. So, these are fairly recent. Now let's roll it down a little bit. Train collisions, more serious risks than some of the other ones, and still okay. Yeah, you can see there we bumped up a little bit last year, but favorable. I'll mention too that these are all footnoted. This is not AAR numbers that we cooked up. Our members are required to submit data to the Federal Railroad Administration in more detail than I think any other mode. It's audited. The FRA kicks the door in with their Kalashnikovs and wants to look at the data, and they'll audit. If they find problems, they'll fine the railroad. So, it's pretty rigorous stuff. Now we go down a little bit further to derailments. Once again, pretty good. Of more interest to this group, perhaps, is equipment-caused accidents. I suspect somebody else, like Heinz, might have showed you some of this earlier, so won't dwell on it too much. Track is, of course, a source of higher risk, especially when you're dealing with main track speeds and so forth. Excellent work there. Human factors is probably the largest single cause of risk in the industry right now, and it's moderately down too as we continue working on training and better technologies and so forth. Not too bad here. Some of you might have heard of the Harriman Awards that was named for an executive of a couple of Western railroads over 100 years ago. After he died, his wife put the award together in his memory. At that time, there were more than 2,000 fatalities a year. 2,000 fatalities. I don't think that the modern world would accept that kind of number nowadays. And of course, we're looking at fatalities we have now. This is something that is often outside of our control, but making modest progress there as well. One thing people don't often think about is that highway traffic is increasing. This is fairly recent data. Vehicle miles up 2%. Fatality rate for them is up 2%. Some of these are definitely not something that's within our wheelhouse. What's interesting is we hear a lot about distracted driving and drowsy driving and speeding. Those actually dropped a little bit according to the NHTSA data, whereas alcohol impairment and not wearing seatbelts increased. So that's just a little interesting factoid for your next cocktail party. Now look here, where are most of the risks at crossings? Signalized crossings. Why is that? Well, because signals are put at the crossings that are higher risk. There's nothing surprising about it. But again, it shows motorist behavior plays a major role here. And remember, some of this stuff is large, heavy commercial vehicles, which is pretty bad stuff for us. And of course, trespassing remains a problem. Suicides, some of this data is hard to quantify. The railroads don't declare whether something is a suicide or not. Even if we have it on camera and somebody's standing in front of a train or something, the coroner does. And of course, coroners might be reluctant to declare a suicide, stigma for a family, or impact on insurance or something like that. So we really don't know. We just know that it's a problem. We are putting a lot of energy into it. I often will mention at conferences that most of these are not fatalities, but if you get hit by a train, your quality of life might be pretty bad. So if you're contemplating suicide by train, you might want to think again. All right, let's look a little bit at the economic. Notice here there's no lights up there, and the track is not visible. Regulation for us, commercial regulation, actually occurred long before Teddy Roosevelt Trust Busters. Back in 1887, you know, you might have heard of some naughtiness with people like Rockefeller and the oil deals with various railroads and so forth like that. Probably well-deserved at that time for whatever reason. What people don't realize, though, is how much of our competition was heavily subsidized going back over 100 years now. I remember reading articles about airports that were built for airliners who paid modest landing fees and soaked up a lot of the passenger traffic. In the 1950s, the interstate highway system, which was originally designed for civil defense, but obviously had a major impact on our passengers. And this kind of shows how our market dominance suffered badly through these and various other things that went along at that time. Who's familiar with the Big John case? Good. Because this is kind of interesting, and a lot of people aren't aware of this. The Southern Railway developed the ubiquitous covered hopper. That's, you know, obviously they don't look like that any longer, but that car was designed by them. I have to look this up because the numbers are so interesting. You could, you know, if you ever see the movie called Picnic with William Holden and, what's her name, you know, beautiful actress, you know, the handsome young stranger comes to town, meets the girl and so on. Well, he's working in a grain elevator, loading grain into boxcars. Before this car was developed, that's how grain was shipped. You'd open the sliding door, you put some boards up halfway, you stick a big rubber hose in there, dump the grain in, people would shovel it to the sides of the cars. How much grain did you get in that car? 15, 20 tons maybe? Imagine the productivity this car represented. The Southern Railway applied to the Interstate Commerce Commission to lower the rate up to 60% for grain and multiple car shipments. Dear government, we have come up with a new technology. We would like to lower our rates to stimulate business. Well, how did the government respond to that? I have to write this down because I can't remember it all. 2 years of hearings, 139 days total, 15,000 pages of testimony. The Interstate Commerce Commission said, no, you may not lower the rates. You're just trying to screw the waterways guys. To heck with it. They went to the Supreme Court twice before they could lower rates. And so they named the car the Big John. You might remember sort of a 50s song about Big Bad John down to the coal mine holding up the timbers that were cracking so all his buddies couldn't get out. So that name was sort of a, you know, maybe I wasn't working at that time, so I don't know why they chose that name, but that's the Big John car. I think there's one or two of them still wandering around, obviously, you know, repainted, or maybe they painted that slogan on the new car. But that's what we were dealing with at that time, and that's why 40% of us were in bankruptcy in the late 70s, and that's why we got deregulated. Next time you're really bored, just Google Penn Central 1974, and you'll see this video. I moved it ahead because this year's Oldsmobiles didn't make it to market. This video is like 25 minutes, well, you can't read it, 25 minutes long. It was put out by the Penn Central just before it collapsed in bankruptcy, the largest bankruptcy in history at the time, to show how terrible things were. It showed a couple of yards filled with bad order boxcars. No room to maneuver around to get them repaired. You know, junk equipment. The movie opens with a couple of cars rolling down the hump at a brisk speed and derailing because the track was so rotten the cars just fell off the track. You know, and it shows these employees dealing with this stuff. It's a nightmare. This is the kind of stuff we had before the deregulation. After deregulation, this is a chart that we put out frequently, but look at the changes in things, you know, in order we could, I mean, I was in sales at the time with Staggers, and we did things that would have put us in jail before Staggers. We could negotiate confidential contracts with customers, give them lower rates if they ship more business. It allowed us to make more money predictably so we could make decisions about repairing things and so forth. Pretty neat stuff. If anybody wants, I can rattle through what these numbers mean. If you just look at the trends, though, it's pretty self-evident where we're at. You can also see 2008, things got a little sloppier when the bottom fell out of the market in so many different ways. What's interesting, though, is you look at the spending on the network, around Staggers right there. You know, obviously traffic's slumped down a little bit right now, so that, you know, this meteoric rate has slowed a little bit. You know, you look here and you look at, as we spend more, things get safer. Is that surprising? You consider the track was so rotten during that bankruptcy period. this is giving you kind of a sense of where we are right now. Things are looking pretty good right now. I mean, obviously there's the uncertainty of the tariffs and all that sort of thing, but, not bad. Let's hope it continues. If you care about any specific commodities, here's a chart here. Let's look at some big ticket items. Chemicals, this is high value business for the industry, up 23% year to date this week. Well, let's look at year. It's not quite as exciting, but lots of green numbers right here. Petroleum, oil's up, I got it written down here somewhere. I think it's back up 60% over last year, which was kind of a slump year after the big, Bakken expansion around 2012. Intermodal too, obviously trailers are kind of becoming less relevant, but look at the container business, except of course weight right there. This is expensive business to operate. It costs us more, it consumes a lot of capacity, but we're finding a way to make a success of it. This is kind of interesting too, to look at what happened. Who would have predicted this stuff back in 2010? Nobody. And it really took off there. I guess it's now probably back up around here. Pipelines are still constrained, and market conditions change so much that building a pipeline is kind of risky because you can't move it, once you've installed it. So, with rail cars, you can send them wherever the market will carry them. Now, that's a little old now, I guess, but that kind of showed things were a little uncertain. I guess right now, though, we're doing pretty well. I think derrick counts is back up in the Bakkens again. Somebody told me that there's all sorts of help wanted stuff going on over there again, as there was a couple of years ago. This is kind of startling, though, too. Read this caption right here. 27,000 coal trains of business gone. I can't remember where I got that. I better look it up because that's kind of a hairy number. But, basically we're close to half of the coal business we had before. Out in western or eastern Wyoming, there's a 4-track main there that is busy. I suppose we can pull one of the tracks up now and still handle the business there. There's still quite a few locomotives in storage. I don't know where all the coal guns are being stored. Anybody know? I've often wondered about that. There must be hundreds of sets still out of service. If you take coal out of the equation, not bad. And, this is where our predictions are at the moment right here. This isn't us, this is Federal Highway. And of course, we stand to gain some of this, not all of it, but some of it. Lots of questions on the horizon. I mean, autonomous vehicles applies to commercial trucks as well. You can imagine what that would do to some of our high-value business if they got more competitive. Truckers are, of course, faced with higher fuel costs, hurting them more than us. Driver shortage is clearly hurting them more than us. And I just went around the internet and found some happy pictures to show, just different railroads. Like here's CN is putting in a long siding in an area where they have a grade. It was kind of a choke point. That's kind of neat. Poor BNSF, they've been trying to get this tunnel or this bridge in Idaho built for a couple of years. Yay, they got approval to build it, but within days another lawsuit was filed. So I don't know. I guess people think that, if you can keep standing on the railroad soon, then it'll go away or something. I mean, we need this business. A second track isn't going to imperil the fish in that lake or something. Okay, anybody here from Norfolk Southern? I'm kind of dumping on you at first. You might think, why am I showing a 20-year-old cab sitting in the dirt here? Well, look closer, though. Somebody welded a hook on there, and notice there's no burn marks. This cab was lifted off the frame because that's the exact same frame from where that cab came. The miracle of the internet, you can look this stuff up. So this is one of their rebuilds where they took a 20-year-old DC locomotive, overhauled it, put a new cab on it, and converted it to AC motors. So it's kind of neat. UP is building, you notice here they say the largest facility capital investment, not the largest yard. I was told, I don't know if this is true, but that some politician in Nebraska said, North Platte's the largest yard in the world. We can't lose that. So I guess UP messaging is careful to say it's the largest capital investment, but I think this is the largest yard. It's going to be the largest yard in the world. There's already stuff going on down there. I guess it's going to be open, I don't know, next year or so. I don't know what it is, but I've heard there's going to be a huge amount of automation in this yard. It'll be interesting to see what it is when things get further along. This is kind of located in an interesting area right here. Hearn is kind of in the middle of nowhere in the central Texas, slightly to the east. But it's a major route for the petrochemical traffic coming up from the Gulf Coast. You know, there's a big SP yard down there called, good grief, I'm getting a brain lock now. What's the big yard in Houston? I don't know. That was sort of, remember the UP had some major troubles there after the acquisition of the SP. That was the focal point. Well, this yard, of course, is going to be streamlining a lot of that traffic. You know, KCS is going to Port of New Orleans. CSX is going after intermodal business again. CP has an opportunity for crude oil and so on. So, you know, just some neat stuff right there. All right, now let's switch to working alone. I'll start off with a remote control locomotive. Many people are familiar with that. Most of the time, these crews might work with somebody else, but there are some isolated operations, perhaps on a short line or something. These boxes have a number of novel features on them, including what's called a tilt switch. By the way, it's an FRA offense if you don't have the harness proper. Because, you know, there's 4 points of contact with that vest. So if you lean over, it's not going to swing out and stay level, because if you lean over and fall, it detects that and it will stop the locomotive immediately in case you stumbled and fell in front of the engine or something like that. So that's called a tilt switch. And these are designed to respond in different ways. Generally, all of them will broadcast on the locomotive's radio, man down, engine number so-and-so, man down. In rural locations, they will connect this thing to a repeater. These devices can have GPS on them. The locomotives generally have GPS right now, but if somebody's handling 30 cars in the middle of nowhere and they fall down, the locomotive may be some distance away. So we had a Rail Safety Advisory Committee talking about RCL, and the labor fellows were concerned about this and wanted GPS. And we told them, well, you know, we're already getting that. They said, yeah, but it should only work when the guy falls down. And we said, well, you can't have a safety device that only works like that. It has to be on all the time so you know it's working, which means that you can monitor what the employees do. Never mind, get to that stuff. But anyway, so that's that. So let's look at other things right here. What I found was that one Class 1 railroad lost a commercial driver who was, you know, out in the mountains somewhere, and he pulled over feeling badly and passed away in his truck. There was no accident, but he died. But the railroad didn't know about it for hours. You know, there's big trucks parked on the side of the road, maybe a rest stop, I don't know. Nobody paid any attention to it. And so they began to think, well, what should we be doing about that? So they began a risk assessment, and they identified the types of employees that this would be appropriate for, but also those that it wouldn't. There are many types of jobs where you're generally not alone. And so you've got somebody else with you, i.e., you know, some of these jobs and so forth. So they looked at signal maintainers, radio technicians, I think there was one other one, which I can't remember right now. And so they've begun a process where they'll have sort of an informal keep alive process where you're checking in. What the senior manager did is they dictated to each division, you guys identify your areas of risk and you figure it out. We're not going to dictate to you how you do it. So, you know, this is still evolving on that railroad. But they are working with a vendor or talking to a vendor about some kind of electronic solution that would do something like this automatically. You know, for example, if you're a roadway worker, somebody inspecting the track, you have to fill out a document called an individual train detection. This is an FRA regulation. But you also have to have a job briefing that's typically with the train dispatcher. So the train dispatcher knows where you are, what you're doing, how long you can be out there, and so on. So that's kind of an add-on to that for other crafts, which there's no regulation to do that. They also mentioned kind of an interesting thing that one guy did on his own. He's a signal maintainer, so he's a techie kind of a guy. And he had some kind of communication system in his company truck. You know, signal maintainers get called out all hours of the day and night to go out and fix things. So he set up a geofence around his home so that when he pulls in the driveway, it identifies him as home again, and he actually had to go to his supervisor. Some of those guys are obligated to report in for hours of service record keeping and so on. And so that's a neat idea, but obviously I doubt that many employees would subscribe to that. Certainly their representatives wouldn't like that for other reasons. So it's just a novel idea that somebody came up with. just to give you an idea. So that's all I can find out about working alone at this point. So I don't know who brought that question to the table, or if they're here, maybe they have some further questions, maybe I can wing it or something like that. Yeah.
Well, Jeffrey, speaking of working alone, what's your latest on one-person crews or mandated crew size, and also the linkage to the specter of autonomous vehicles?
Excellent, Pat. In our previous administration, the Federal Air Administration signaled its intent to regulate crews. It was basically, in simple terms, every train on a Class 1 has to have 2 people. They don't have to be on the train, because sometimes the conductor's in a truck and he might drive ahead to the next customer and get the gates open and get the guard out or something like that. But they have to be assigned. We took strong exception to that for the obvious reasons that, technology is evolving and there's other ways to do things and so forth. And they really tried to get that rule out before the administration changed. I'll be quite candid, we threw a lot of rocks at that thing. We brought a lot of effort to bear to oppose it, and we were unable to get it out, and so it stalled. At the same time, we're not opposed to a regulation that's rational, because, labor's strategy, and I don't blame them. Well, let's try to do it at the state level. I think several states already have a 2-man crew rule. Just like, when some of us started, I remember the state of Ohio had a 5-man crew law. So freight trains would have to stop at the border to pick up an extra brakeman who would ride to the other end and get off, because the state had this safety rule. So it's interesting that a couple of railroads have said in public comments that, we're working toward that area, but it's not top of our priority. One short line was presenting to the operating guys yesterday and said, and this is not their chief executive, he said, as long as I'm here, we're not going to have 1-man trains. So it's kind of slow going, but at the same time, there are autonomous trains operating in Australia using the same kinds of equipment we already have. And a couple of railroads I've gone over to visit them and learn how it's done. I got a briefing from one of them, and it's kind of interesting. How are we doing on time, by the way? I think I've still got a few more minutes, okay. Basically you've got a railroad just like ours that's got the equipment, but the dispatcher is in Perth, which is, I suspect, it's several hundred miles away from this railroad. This is an iron ore railroad way up in the northwest of the country. And you get the locomotive set up, you communicate with the dispatcher, you step off, I think there's some kind of a button you push, like ready to go, and then that's it. And then when the dispatcher's ready, off the train goes. Obviously, there's not a lot of people living out there, so you don't deal with the crossings. There are some crossings, though. They've got cameras on the locomotive that are accessible from the dispatcher pretty quickly. They have a collision sensing process. If the train strikes something with more force than hitting a kangaroo or something, it stops immediately. Because obviously you're going to strike things that are not consequences like that. I guess if you strike something and it's not consequences, you can still access the video or maybe wind it back and see what the heck it was or something like that. This has been going on, I don't know, it's about a year right now. So, obviously we're keeping an eye on that. One might conclude that in the U.S., an example where this technology could arguably make sense would be in the coal fields of eastern Wyoming. In the good old days of coal, we had over 100 trains a day up there within a limited geographic area. You could have 4 or 5 conductors and pickup trucks with radios and tools, and could be available to assist the train that's got a challenge at any moment, possibly quicker than somebody walking back to check the train or something like that. So time will tell. Autonomous vehicles, kind of interesting. I administer our Grade Crossing and Trespass Committee, and we were kind of concerned because we kept hearing from many different people, well, PTC will, you have to use the word whisk somewhere. We'll whisk the cars across, that's a phony word, but the PTC system will be broadcasting a message and the autonomous vehicles can pick that up and can know where there's a train nearby and what to do and so on. I'm thinking, what if you got a great separation? But more importantly, PTC is not intended and not able to do that. For one thing, we use our own proprietary frequency. There's a standard for automotive vehicle communications and it's not 220 like ours is. Secondly, we have a heartbeat system with PTC that you can miss up to 3 communications back and forth before the locomotive gets excited. They're 4 seconds apart. That's a total of 16 seconds that you could have a lack of communication before something happens. How far can you go in 16 seconds at 60 miles an hour, train or truck? What is it, 1,500 feet, something like that? It's not going to work. So we keep pounding away at this message. One of the railroads created a wonderful presentation for the autonomous vehicle community to acquaint them with what we're talking about. Imagine you're on a 2-lane country road and you're approaching a 4-lane divided highway, you know, with a center island in the middle of it, 55 miles an hour. What is the autonomous vehicle going to do? You know, it's going to pull up and sees the stop sign. It's going to have to know that there's vehicles coming this way, but they're far enough away. What if there's a truck parked on the shoulder right there? What if there's a broken down car in the island between the lanes of the highway? What if there's a blockage just beyond the highway so you can't get off it? You autonomous vehicle guys, you got to figure this stuff out. How are you going to do that with it? Okay, now let's talk about a railroad. I've got a 4-track main with a crossbuck. And I've got a train on the nearest track that's got air trouble. He's 50 yards away. How are you going to handle that? It's not PTC or some gizmo that we hang on the crossbuck. You know, you guys have got to solve this stuff. So that's kind of our message. You know, we've been really pushing that hard so people begin to pay attention to us. So, you know, if they don't suddenly think, oh, I thought we would use PTC. Or, by the way, what is PTC? You know, that kind of stuff. So that is your question, Patrick?
Yes.
Others. I'm from Washington, but I'm not from Washington, so, you know, I can be candid, sort of. I'm 4 years past retirement age, I can be candid, sort of.
Jeff, with that 16-second potential loss,
Yeah.
cumulative loss of pounds, you're referring to the PTC EOT being not anything coming from Wayside, right?
I plead ignorance here. I'm hoping somebody here is smarter than I am. I don't know. I think it might be the back office communication with the locomotive. I may be wrong, but my point is that some critical signal that people on the highway side think that they can use for their own purposes.
Well, it could be the Wayside interface.
Yeah.
It could be a lot of things.
Yeah. But I guess that's okay. That train comes 60 miles an hour, it travels 1,800 feet before, you know, the system understands that it's got a comm problem. So clearly irrelevant to PTC, you know, helping autonomous vehicles navigate across our tracks. You've been a wonderful officer.